Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, Senator Dole, members of the 101st Congress, ladies and gentlemen. For a private citizen to be asked to speak before Congress is a rare and very high honor, and I thank you. Simon Willard was never a member of Congress in the usual sense. Simon Willard of Roxbury, Massachusetts, was a clockmaker early in the 19th century, and he did it all by hand and by eye. In cutting his wheel teeth, reads an old account, he did not mark out the spaces on the blank brass wheel and cut the teeth to measure, but he cut, rounded up, and finished the teeth as he went along, using his eye only in spacing, and always he came out even. It is doubtful, the old account continues, if such a feat in mechanics was ever done before, and certainly never since. The exact date is uncertain, but about 1837, when he was in his 80s, Simon Willard made a most important clock. I'll come back to that. On a June afternoon in 1775, before there was ever a Congress of the United States or a United States of America, a small boy stood with his mother on a distant knoll watching the Battle of Bunker Hill. That was Adams, John Quincy Adams, diplomat, senator, Secretary of State, President of the United States, who in his lifetime had seen more and contributed more to the history of his time than almost anyone, and who, as no former president ever had, returned here to the Hill to take a seat in the House of Representatives in the 22nd Congress, and was thrilled at the prospect. Most importantly, it was here that this extraordinary American had his finest hours. Adams took his seat in the old house in what is now Statuary Hall in 1831. Small, fragile, fearing no one, he spoke his mind and conscience. He championed mechanical improvements and scientific inquiry. To no one in Congress are we so indebted for the establishment of the Smithsonian Institution. With Congressman Lincoln of Illinois and Corwin of Ohio, he cried out against the Mexican War, and for 8 long years, almost alone, he battled the infamous gag rule imposed by Southerners to prevent any discussion of petitions against slavery. Adams hated slavery, but he was fighting, he said, more for the unlimited right of all citizens to have their petitions heard, whatever their cause. It was a gallant fight, and he won. The gag rule was permanently removed. Earlier this year, at the time of the inaugural ceremonies, I heard a television commentator broadcasting from Statuary Hall complain of the resonance and echoes in the room. What resonance? What echoes? John Quincy Adams is a reminder that giants come in all shapes and sizes, and that at times they have walked these halls, their voices have been heard, their spirit felt here. Listen, please, to this from his diary from March 29, 1841. The world, the flesh, all the devils in hell are arrayed against any man who now in this North American Union shall dare to join the standard of Almighty God to put down the African slave trade. And what can I, upon the verge of my 74th birthday, with a shaking hand, a darkening eye, a drowsy brain, and with all my faculties dropping from me one by one as the teeth are dropping from my head, what can I do for the cause of God and man? Yet my conscience presses me on. Let me but die upon the breach. And how he loved the House of Representatives. The forms and proceedings of the House, he writes, this call of the states for petitions, the colossal emblem of the Union over the Speaker's chair, this historic muse at the clock, the echoing pillars of the hall, the tripping Mercuries who bear the resolutions and amendments between the members and the chair, the calls of ayes and noes, with the different intonations of the answers from different voices, the gobbling manner of the clerks in reading over the names, the tone of the Speaker in announcing the vote, and the varied shades of pleasure and pain in the countenances of the members on hearing it would form a fine subject for a descriptive poem. Some nights he returned to his lodging so exhausted he could barely crawl up the stairs. In the winter of 1848, at the age of 80, after 17 years in the Congress, Adams collapsed at his desk. A brass plate in the floor of Statuary Hall marks the place. He was carried to the Speaker's office, and there, 2 days later, he died. At the end, Henry Clay, in tears, was holding his hand. Congressman Lincoln helped with the funeral arrangements. Daniel Webster wrote the inscription for the casket. Many splendid books have been written about Congress. Allen Drury's A Senate Journal, Harry McPherson's A Political Education, Alvin Josephi's On the Hill, and Kings of the Hill by Representative Richard Cheney and Lynn B. Cheney. Rayburn, a fine recent biography by D.B. Hardeman and Donald Bacon, and The Great Triumvirate about Clay, Webster, and Calhoun by Merrill Peterson. Now, in this bicentennial year, comes Volume 1 of Senator Byrd's monumental History of the Senate, a work like no other. But a book that does justice to the story of Adams' years in the House, one of the vivid chapters in our political history, is still to be written, as are so many others. Our knowledge, our appreciation of the history of Congress and those who have made history here are curiously, regrettably deficient. The plain truth is, historians and biographers have largely neglected the subject. 200 years after the creation of Congress, we have only begun to tell the story of Congress, which of course means the opportunities for those who write and teach could not be greater. There are no substantial up-to-date biographies of Justin Murrill of Vermont, author of the Land Grant College Act, or of Jimmy Burns, considered the most skillful politician of his day, or Joe Robinson, the tenacious Democratic Majority Leader whose sudden death in an apartment not far from here meant defeat for Franklin Roosevelt's court-packing scheme, or Carl Hayden of Arizona, who served longer in the Senate than anybody, 41 years. We have John Garrity's Life of Henry Cabot Lodge Sr., but no biography of Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. Search the library shelves for a good biography of Alben Barkley or Speaker Joe Martin, and you won't find one. They don't exist. The only biography of Arthur Vandenberg ends in 1945, when his career was just taking off. The 20th century senator who has been written about the most is Joe McCarthy. There are a dozen books about McCarthy, yet there is no biography of the senator who had the backbone to stand up to him first, Margaret Chase Smith. "I speak as a Republican," she said on that memorable day in the Senate. "I speak as a woman. I speak as a United States senator. I speak as an American. I don't want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the four horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear." We have books on people like McCarthy and Bilbo, but no real biographies of George Aiken or Frank Church. Richard Russell, one of the most highly regarded and influential figures ever to serve in the Senate in this century, used to take home old bound copies of the Congressional Record to read in the evenings for pleasure. He loved the extended debates and orations of older times and would remark to his staff how strange it made him feel to realize that those who had once counted for so much and so affected the course of American life were entirely forgotten. You wonder how many who pour in and out of the Russell Building each day or the Cannon Building have any notion who Richard Russell was, or Joseph Gurney Cannon. There is no adequate biography of either man. As Speaker of the House and head of the Rules Committee, Uncle Joe Cannon of Danville, Illinois, once wielded power here in this chamber of a kind unimaginable today. He was tough, shrewd, profane, picturesque, and a terrible stumbling block. It was the new 20th century. The country wanted change, reform. Uncle Joe did not. Everything is all right out west and around Danville, he would say. The country don't need any legislation. When a bill came up to add a new function to the U.S. Commission of Fish and Fisheries, making it the U.S. Commission of Fish and Fisheries and Birds, Cannon protested. He didn't like adding "and birds." "And birds" was new and different and therefore unacceptable. The insurrection that ended Cannon's iron rule, a revolt here in this chamber in 1910, was led by George Norris of Red Willow County, Nebraska. There have been few better men in public life than George Norris, and few more important turning points in our political history. Yet today it is hardly known. How much more we need to know about the first Congress, when everything was new and untried. How much we could learn from a history of the Foreign Relations Committee. Imagine the book that could be written about the Senate in the momentous days of the New Deal. Think of the changes brought about then. Think of who was in the Senate. Robert Wagner, Burton K. Wheeler, Hugo Black, Claude Pepper, Barclay, Huey Long, Tom Conley, Vandenberg, Taft, George Norris, Bora of Idaho, and J. Hamilton Lewis of Illinois, a politician of the old school who still wore wing collars and spats and a pink toupee to match his pink Van Dyke whiskers. It was Ham Lewis who advised a newly arrived freshman senator from Missouri named Truman, "Harry, don't start out here with an inferiority complex. The first 6 months you'll wonder how you got here. After that, you'll wonder how the hell the rest of us got here." For some unaccountable reason, there is not even a first-rate history of the Capitol. Nothing comparable, say, to William Seeley's history of the White House. This magnificent building grew in stages as America grew. It is really an assembly of different buildings representing different times and different aspirations, and the story should be told that way. We are all so accustomed to seeing our history measured and defined by the presidency that we forget how much of the story of the country happened here. Beside Congress, the presidency seems clear, orderly, easy to understand. The protagonists are relatively few in number and take their turns on stage one at a time. Congress, by contrast, seems to roll on like a river. Someone said you can never cross the same river twice. Congress is like that, always there and always changing. Individuals come and go, terms overlap, the stage is constantly crowded, the talk and the rumpus go on, and there is such a lot of humbug and so much that has been so overwhelmingly boring. But let no one misunderstand, and least of all you who serve here. We have as much reason to take pride in Congress as in any institution in our system. As history abundantly shows, Congress, for all its faults, has not been the unbroken parade of clowns and thieves and posturing windbags so often portrayed. We make sport of Congress, belittle it, bewail its ineptitude and inefficiency, and we have from the beginning, and we probably always will. You do it yourselves, particularly at election time. But what should be spoken of more often and more widely understood are the great victories that have been won here, the decisions of courage and vision achieved, the men and women of high purpose and integrity, and yes, at times genius, who have served here. It was Congress, after all, that provided the Homestead Act, ended slavery, ended child labor, built the railroads, built the Panama Canal. It was Congress that paid for Lewis and Clark and for our own travels to the moon. It was Congress that changed the course of history with Lend-Lease and the Marshall Plan, that created Social Security, TVA, the GI Bill, the Voting Rights Act, and the incomparable Library of Congress. It is not by chance that we Americans have built here on our Capitol Hill, side by side with the center of government, our greatest library, a free and open repository of books and ideas without limit on viewpoint in every language from every part of the world. In 200 years, 11,220 men and women have served in the House and Senate, and while the proportions of Black Americans, of women, of Hispanic and Asian Americans, and Native Americans have not and do not now reflect the country at large, it is nonetheless the place where all our voices are heard. Here, as they say, here, as perhaps we cannot say too often, the people rule. We need to know more about Congress. We need to know more about Congress because we need to know more about leadership and about human nature. We may also pick up some ideas. Considering the way the defense spending has been handled in recent years, we might, for example, think of reinstating an investigating committee like the Truman Committee of World War II, which saved billions of dollars and thousands of lives. If we are unwilling to vote the taxes to pay for our war on drugs, to save our country, why not sell bonds as we did in 2 world wars? It is hard to imagine anyone not wanting to buy a bond to win the war on drugs. Above all, we need to know more about Congress because we are Americans. We believe in governing ourselves. The boy should read history, the first John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail about the education of their son John Quincy. History, history, history. We must all read history and write and publish history better. Teach history better. How can we know who we are and where we are headed if we don't know where we have come from? How can we call ourselves patriots if we know little of our country's past? Who were those people in the old bound volumes of the Congressional Record? What moved them? What did they know that we do not? Our past is not only prologue, it can be bracing. In Emerson's words, the world is young. The former great men and women call to us affectionately. I have decided that the digital watch is the perfect symbol of an imbalance in outlook in our day. It tells us only what time it is now, as if that were all anyone would wish to know or need to know. Which brings me back to Simon Willard. In the years when the House of Representatives met in Statuary Hall, all deliberations were watched over by the muse of history, Clio. She is there still, over the north doorway. She is riding the winged car of history, as it is called, keeping note in her book. The idea was that those who sat below would take inspiration from her. They would be reminded that they too were part of history, that their words and actions would face the judgment of history, and that they could count themselves part of an honorable heritage. Clio and the car of history are by the Italian sculptor Carlo Franzoni of Carrara. The clock in the foreground is by Simon Willard. It was, as I said, installed about 1837. Its inner workings cut freehand by Simon Willard, and they have ticked off the minutes and hours through debate over the gag rule, the annexation of Texas, the Mexican War, tariffs, postal service, the establishment of the Naval Academy, statehood for Arkansas, Michigan, Wisconsin, matters related to immigration, the gold rush, statehood for California, the fateful Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the final hours of John Quincy Adams. It is also a clock with 2 hands and an old-fashioned face, the kind that shows what time it is now, what time it used to be, and what time it will become. And it still keeps time. On we go.